Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and we're here for our MSI Round 3 overview and analysis video. Incredibly excited to get this one to you guys. It's always fun when we get these inter-region matchups. You know, MSI hasn't exactly lived up to that expectation up until this point with so many kind of region versus region, you know, team kill conflicts, if you will, but we're finally starting to get to the nitty-gritty with only Eastern teams remaining. We're going to see our first of the top 4 be eliminated here today in today's series. Is it going to be the LCK champion, or is it going to be the runner-up from the LPL? I want to know what you guys' thoughts were down in the comment section below. Of course, if you want to know what my thoughts are, not only on this series, but on the tournament as a whole up until this point, you can check out every single video that I've posted. That's going to be recapping every single day of MSI action. That's going to be linked up in the iCard alongside my bracket preview for the main stage and my primer from the beginning of MSI just in general. And that really goes into depth on how I think a lot of these teams want to end up playing. If you checked out my previous video, you'll know my thoughts on these teams. But today, we are going to be getting into it, you know, proper. It's going to be a really fun matchup. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into it. Of course, if you are new here, what we do is go game by game, talking about the advantages and the disadvantages that each team had. We're going to give out a player of the game, a dud of the game, and at the end of the series, we're going to give out my player of the series as well. But without further ado, let's go ahead and preview it. We have a matchup here between the number 1 seed from the LCK in Gen.G and the number 2 seed from the LPL in Bilibili Gaming. Certainly an intriguing matchup on paper, because I really do think stylistically these teams are about as opposite as you can get. Gen.G much more of the controlled style. They very much do not try to make these super aggressive plays in the early game. They like to wait it out. They're fantastic in the mid game, and they're great in late game team fights. That's really what has pushed them over the top. That's what allowed them to take out T1 in the LCK finals. Unfortunately, they weren't able to do that here at MSI, going down to the lower bracket, which is where we are now, but they're still an incredibly scary team to go into. Peanut and Chovy are still one of the best mid-jungles in the entire world, and Pace has really taken over as a rising superstar in the bot lane. But they're going up against Bilibili Gaming, who's basically the opposite. If Gen.G is a team that likes to scale, likes to play a little bit safer, doesn't want to take a ton of risks, BLG is going to push the pedal to the metal. They're going to step on the gas pedal and try to, you know, blow you out of the water early on in games. A lot of how they won in the LPL playoffs in particular was gaining a lot of early game advantages. I could definitely see that being an advantageous state for them in this series in particular, but as you guys know, if you watched my previous video, I have Gen.G winning this series 3-1. I think they should be the better team. Between these two, I think their controlled style actually should match up better against a team that's a little bit more, you know, I don't want to say lax when it comes to their macro, but they can certainly throw out good decision-making in order to try and surprise opponents. I just don't think Gen.G is one of the teams that's going to be surprised. But obviously, when you get to this point, when you're a top 4 team in the world, which is what these 4 teams are, there really isn't a lot of difference between you. And so, as you know, I had Gen.G ranked 3, I had Bilibili ranked 4 going into the tournament. So this really could go either way. Again, I want to know what you guys' thoughts were down below, but it's time to jump into the game-by-game analysis. Of course, if we're doing that, we got to start with game number 1. And the winner of game number 1 was Bilibili Gaming. They are able to jump out to a 1-0 series lead here, which is massive. Again, I've talked about this a lot over the course of the tournament, but specifically with BLG, confidence and momentum has been massive for them over the course of the year. There were a couple teams at this tournament that I would definitely say that is the case for. BLG being one of the most egregious ones. When they're hot, they are one of the best teams in the entire world, as we see with a pretty good win against a good Gen.G team in game number 1. A lot of their players really stepped up. Basically, no weaknesses. Bin and Elk were phenomenal team fighters, really taking over. Yagao was a phenomenal facilitator on that Talia pick that he really made his own in 2022. Jun was really good on the Maokai, especially with securing objectives, and On was keeping Elk alive at all costs. Basically, everybody did their job in this game, and that's exactly what you want to see for BLG. But how exactly did we get there? What were the events of the game that ended up leading to this point? Well, let's go over them right now. It was a pretty even early game, all things considered. Honestly, I would consider this, you know, Gen.G favored for the most part, because both teams were trading, and I think if you're going into a mid-game relatively even from both sides, I'm mostly going to consider that Gen.G favored just because of personnel in this series, but it certainly wasn't a bad early game from BLG by any regard. They dive bot for first blood, which is nice, and then, you know, they try to look for a gank mid, but Chovy honestly just outplays it a little bit on the Lissandra. They're able to counter it, bring up Delight, bring up Peanut, and they're able to end up with a kill mid. And so it's just kind of back and forth plays. BLG continue to get some picks early, but Peanut and Paze, really want to try and team up and become a little bit of a force in the mid game, so they start diving Elk. Basically, the point I'm trying to make is there were a lot of plays going on around the map, a lot of aggressive calls coming in from both teams, neither really wanting to fall behind, and both, particularly willing to trade, I would say, in the early game. BLG do start getting a bit more in the mid game. I would say that they team fight a lot better in this game, in particular in the mid game. A lot of the kind of back and forth team fights are in favor of BLG. However, Gen.G are not really giving up any sort of massive gold lead from them, at least early on in the game, because they're able to, not really lose a lot. We talk about this a lot on the channel, but it's great to win fights if you can get something off of it. But just winning a fight, getting 2 kills, it's good, but it's not going to swing the entire game in your favor. You need to be able to capitalize on the map and be able to pick something else up, besides just the fight. And BLG really weren't able to do that a lot in the mid game. They were able to get some dragons, but that's more for scaling. Gen.G really not giving over a ridiculous lead until 19 minutes, where there's a pretty big fight that is very BLG favored. This is the one where pretty much everybody plays out of their minds. Bin does a ridiculous amount of damage on the Jax, considering that's the champion that he's playing in that current moment, but Elk still looks really good. On is doing a great job peeling for Elk. Everybody is really stepping up, and then from that point onwards, BLG just kind of controlled the map. They were able to pressure Baron at about 25, 26 minutes into the game. They were able to grab it with a nice little dance, and then in the subsequent fight, they end up dominating, and they were able to end the game directly off of that. And so good stuff, I would say, overall for BLG. Certainly not a lot of negatives to give them. I think maybe you could have given over a little less in the early game. Maybe that's really the only negative I could give to them. But even then, I still think a lot of the trades that they were taking were worth it in a vacuum. Like I said, to me, it was Gen.G favored because I consider Gen.G to be the better team-fighting team, but that was not the case in game number 1. BLG kind of flipped that script. They team-fought really well towards the back half of the game, and that's not something that they necessarily, were known for in the LPL. It certainly is something that Gen.G was known for, so that's a really encouraging trait. My player of the game is going to go to Elk in the bot lane. I think realistically, you could very clearly give this to Bin in the top lane as well. Both were very good in this game. Elk was the one who was making more flashy plays, and I think what really tipped me over the top is that Gen.G was investing a lot more into trying to get on top of Elk rather than Bin. Paze in particular really felt like if he traded 1-for-1 that they could win a lot of fights, and that to me shows that, the Zarya was pretty strong and that there was a big emphasis on being able to get on that backline, but Bin was an absolute monster, especially in that fight at 19 minutes. Both of those two are kind of co-players of the game in game number 1, if you will. Yagao was really good as well. I think he's honestly going to get underrated. This champion continues to be one of his best. I was surprised he didn't pull it out nearly as much as he did in 2022 and 2023. I know Talia isn't necessarily as strong. I know the meta has changed a lot. It's not necessarily the shove and roam, move around the map kind of style that it was in 2022, but Yagao was so proficient at this champion last year. It's really good to see him continue to be good on it. And then, like I said, Lulu was massive this game. There's just a lot you can do with that ultimate and with the peel to be able to set up a really fed Zarya, especially when Elk is playing as aggro as he was in this game. So overall, everybody holding up their end of the bargain for BLG. As for Gen.G on the other side, they were okay. There were some good moments. I liked the plays in the early game, specifically coming out of Peanut and Delight. But after that, really just not a lot of plays happening. They kind of just let the game happen. And this is the worry when it comes to Gen.G. This is the reason I didn't rank them as one of the top 2 teams at this tournament, even though they won the LCK. And it's because I think when they go up against, really, really aggressive teams, I'm not exactly sure they're going to be the type to try to answer. They did at the beginning of the game, but they never necessarily followed up on that. A couple of really big misplays coming out from them as well. Dud of the game is going to go to Doran in the top lane. This was not a close one. A lot of misplays coming out from him on the Gragas, which is strange because this is one of his better picks that's obviously well known, but, just a lot of weird plays. He ends up getting, killed in the bot lane because he just misses Q. Like, there really is no other, explanation. It was a point-blank Q on a low target Yagao, and he just messed it up, which obviously sucks, but a couple of team fight errors as well. It wasn't just that one play. A very weird game number 1 from Doran. You're hoping he's going to be able to bounce back because it was not a great start to the series from him. Chovy wasn't particularly good either. He was getting a lot of CS, as Chovy tends to do, but not really impacting the game all that much. Not necessarily in the way that he wasn't moving around, but just that the Lissandra really wasn't doing any damage. It wasn't really creating any opportunities from behind for the team. Peanut did nothing after the early game, and then Paze was trying his best to, I guess, be aggressive, but sometimes it was a little too aggressive. Sometimes he was going in and dying immediately because he didn't have enough mana for E in that 19-minute fight, which I think we all remember. So You know, overall, Gen.G showed some good moments, but definitely a little bit concerning. BLG looked awesome in game number 1, though. If you're able to out-teamfight Gen.G, that's a pretty good recipe for success in this series. That's Gen.G's bread and butter, and if you just do it a little bit better, this might be a BLG-favored series like they did here in game number 1. And so Gen.G very much is going to want to bounce back here. They do not want to go down 0-2 against a team like BLG that plays so aggro, because you really can't make any mistakes from that point onwards, and that's not really a position you want to put yourself in. But for BLG, if you can continue the momentum, continue the confidence, it's going to be a big series lead if you can grab that next game. And so, who's going to be able to do it? Is it going to go 1-1 or 0-2? We're going to find out right now, because the winner of game number 2 was Bilibili Gaming. They are able to take game number 2. They're able to go up into the series 2-0, and that's a pretty damn commanding spot to be in against the winners of the LCK here at MSI. A crazy good showing from BLG at the beginning here. Even I didn't think that they were going to be able to be this dominant in this series. I obviously saw there was a little bit of a stylistic difference, but I thought it would be in favor of Gen.G. That absolutely turns out to not be the case, with BLG honestly just doing a lot of what Gen.G does well better in this series, which is a crazy thing to say, but very quickly we're seeing the emergence of one of the best carry duos in the entire world with Bin and Elk, and man, did they live up to that expectation in this game number 2. Let's go ahead and go over the individual events, because it was a real fun one for BLG. Both teams, again, I would say relatively even in the early game, but I would say as opposed to, you know, last game where it was pretty even, and, you know, the only edge I could give was Gen.G, maybe because they have historically scaled better. I would definitely say Gen.G was a little bit on the better end in the early game here. Definitely a little bit more, getting a little bit more, I should say, with the plays that they were making. BLG does get first blood mid on a very close play. It's almost outplayed by Chovy, but they still are able to pick it up with June going under tower, but you know, they're not really able to get a ton else. Bin is really strong up on the top side. That is certainly not something that is going to be an issue for them moving forward in the game, and I promise we'll continue to discuss this Gwen as the game goes further, but Gen.G know to play around that, and they know to play either for that, and you try to gank him, try to set him behind, or at least try to get Doran into a position where he can deal with the Gwen, at least in lane, or you just play away from him, and that's kind of what Gen.G did, is they wanted to play for dragons early on in the game, and they were able to get most of them. Honestly, they did a pretty good job being able to secure objectives, and honestly, the mid game was mostly their control as well. A couple of really nice picks and a couple of really nice fights allows them to control a lot of the objectives in this game. They're actually able to go up 3 dragons to 1 by the time we hit the mid game. A really nice fight for Gen.G at second Drake, around 15-ish minutes. They get 2 there, and then another really nice one at 4th Drake that they absolutely crush. And by that point, you know, you're really looking at a Gen.G lead, like a legitimate 4K gold Gen.G lead. A lot of that being on Pays on this Aphelios, which is a really good spot to be in. In most cases, I would look at this game as almost unlosable for Gen.G, because as a team, they are very good at playing from a lead in the back half of the game. They are one of the teams that I would trust the most in a situation like this, but BLG very much came to play today, and they continued to try and look for positives. And so what they did was continue to find some great engages, most of the time coming off the back of June, you know, finding somebody on the backline to ult and create some chaos, and then Bin just flanking the backline. And a lot of times what it did was separate Gen.G. And that's really where a lot of the problems were created. You look at Gen.G's comp, and you see a pretty decent front to back. You've got a lot of peel with the Ornn and the Tahm Kench. You've got Dive with the Wukong and the Annie. And then you've got the Aphelios to be the big damage dealer on the backline in the fight, so long as you do have that peel. Unfortunately, when you get separated, that job becomes significantly harder for the peel to be able to accomplish. And, you know, Gen.G really weren't prepared to do that. And so Pays was being taken out early in fights because of Bin. You know, diving that backline, same thing with Chovy in a lot of these fights. Really not a lot of things going on for the 2 main carries on the side of Gen.G, and that allowed BLG to kind of claw their way back into the game. Those 2 fights, or there were 2 fights, I would say, that really were kind of exactly as I explained. And then we get to Baron, and this is really where, or second Baron, I should say, this is really where things are kind of decided. The fight initially actually looks pretty good for Gen.G. It looks like they finally found a situation where they can engage. It looks like Pays is going to be able to take over, but Elk plays out of his freaking mind in this Baron fight, spacing the hell out of Pays, dealing a ridiculous amount of damage, and basically perfectly navigating on the edge of danger the entire fight. It's one of the most unbelievably great team fights that I've seen in quite a while. I've said that quite a bit at this tournament, but there have been a lot of really good individual performances, especially from AD carry players in team fights, and this was one of them. From Elk, he's able to get a quadra kill in that fight purely just from outplaying Gen.G and nothing more, and then they're able to pick up the Baron. One more soul fight goes in the way of BLG. BLG, as you can see, they did get sold this game. They crushed the fight after, and they're able to march down mid and end the game. It's just incredibly impressive stuff coming out from BLG. Not only that they're able to do this, because yes, you know, Bin, Elk, On, you know, Jun, Yagao, these are really good players. These are world-class players, but to be able to do this so consistently in the late game against Gen.G is incredibly impressive, and that's something that you're just not going to be able to you know, live down, quite frankly, if you're Gen.G. Player of the game for me is going to be Bin. I mean, the separation that he was able to cause in a lot of these fights was massive. He gapped Doran super hard in the top lane matchup and then transitioned that into a really big lead in the mid game, and that is disastrous. Gen.G don't really have a lot of good answers to the Gwen, and honestly, like, BLG have a lot of good answers to the things that Gen.G want to do. They've got the Braum for most of them, and honestly, that pick was massive this game, but Elk continues to just be a mechanical god. I mean, truly, when he is on, like, he really is Jackie Love at his absolute best, like, peak Jackie Love. That's really what you get when Elk is at his best, and that's what we saw in this game. That final team fight for the quadra kill was about as perfect as you could possibly play it. He's not going to get player of the game for it because Bin was more useful over the course of the entire game, but like I said at the beginning, these two are very quickly becoming one of the scariest, you know, carry duos in the entire world, regardless of region, regardless of position, regardless of team. Everybody else was still good. Jun with a lot of really good engages this game on the Braum stopped so much of what Gen.G wanted to do, and Yagao was actually super slippery on the Ahri, oftentimes going in alongside the Gwen. Everybody's performing their role on the side of BLG. It isn't one team, you know, kind of taking advantage of maybe a couple of players being strong. It's BLG as a unit really being better. As for Gen.G on the other side, now you're in panic mode. You're down 0-2 against a really aggressive team that now has a ton of momentum, and that's not the situation that you want to be in. This was a very winnable game for you, especially going into the late game, but you just weren't able to hold on. A couple of really bad fights, getting separated by the Gwen. You really had no good answer to it. You can't really let Bin have this champion. I mean, it's just kind of not allowed. A couple of players really not stepping up this series. Doran gets another dead of the game for me. He really has not been good over the beginning part of the series. Bin has just mega gapped him in both games, and that's going to be a little bit of a problem on the top side because Bin is one of the few top laners in the world that really does know how to win the game, like, by himself from that role, and so really not a good situation for them. Chovy's had a couple of bad games, and you can't really afford that if you're Gen.G. Pace has been fine, but he certainly hasn't been this, like, giant takeover threat. I think a lot of the problems do stem on the fact that he's not really getting peeled for, but his positioning hasn't exactly been perfect, and honestly, Elk is outplaying him in this series up to this point. So a lot of things for Gen.G to work on, but things that they can fix. These are fixable problems for this team. Unfortunately, they now have to win 3 games in a row against an incredibly hot and an incredibly confident Bilibili gaming team. Are they going to be able to do it? Well, it's got to start here in game number 3. Is BLG going to be able to close it out with a clean sweep, or is Gen.G going to keep this series alive? Well, the winner of game number 3 was Bilibili Gaming. They are able to take game number 3. They're able to close out this series in a dominating sweep, and they did it over LCK's number 1 seed. I can't stress that enough. An unbelievably good series from the LPL's number 2 seed, about as good as you could possibly have asked for. A lot of things going right for this team, but you gotta give them credit. Every single player on BLG performed at a super high level across this entire series, and that was no exception here in game number 3. I would argue game 3 was probably the most dominating game of the entire series. There were a lot of kills, and there were definitely some dances around Baron in particular, which felt like neither team really wanted to full commit to, but BLG played every single one of these fights about as well as they possibly could have, and they're gonna walk out with the win because of it. So let's go ahead and go over what ended up happening in this game. BLG do get some early wins, but it's really not a crazy early game from either team, which does shock me because I really thought that was going to be the avenue that BLG had to take in order to win this series. They were really dominant in the early game in the LPL, one of the best teams in terms of gold difference at 15 minutes. And Gen.G, it's really not their playstyle. I thought if BLG were going to get something ahead of them, it was going to be there, but it's not really been that. It's been a lot of the fights in the mid and late game, which has been really impressive. But it is a good early game from BLG, a lot of good plays. They end up getting first blood on Chovy in the mid lane without Yagao, a very weird play, but a very good roam by on this Blitzcrank, who we're going to talk about a lot in this game because he made quite a lot of plays, but Peanut does cancel it out by ganking top. He's able to kind of pick off the Scion a little bit on this Kindred, get a little bit ahead, but overall, I would say the early game definitely going in favor of BLG. The mid game really is defined by Yagao, in my opinion. I know a lot of people are going to look at Elk and On as the two players, and even Jun as the players that really define this game for BLG, but to me, Yagao was fantastic across this entire game on the Ahri, and I really do believe that his play in the mid game here is really what started to separate them. A couple of really big picks. He almost outplays a gank bot, but him being able to solo kill Peanut was absolutely massive and just kind of set them up. His flank on the fight at 18 minutes was absolutely huge to be able to get that charm off and be able to really disrupt Paze from being able to actually fight back. A lot of the mid-game fights where BLG was able to generate a lot of their lead were because of Yagao playing really well on this Ahri. Just an incredibly good mid-game. And this is where we start getting into the Baron dances. I'm not going to waste too much of your time talking about every single thing that happened at these Baron dances, but all of them last about 7 minutes, like, by themselves, and so, you know, you can guess that there's probably a lot going on in them, and, you know, for the most part, BLG coming out on top. It's very much back and forth. BLG winning a fight, and then, you know, Gen.G just kind of not losing hard enough to give up all the pressure, and so BLG feel like they can't take Baron, and so we do the dance again, and, you know, maybe the fight's not as conclusive this time, and yada, yada, yada. Eventually, Gen.G gives over first Baron, but BLG is definitely getting ahead in this game. They give it over, you know, to stop the soul, I should say. There definitely is a reason for them to give over Baron for free, but BLG definitely dancing around Baron for quite a while. BLG win enough to get the first one, though, and then eventually BLG just continue to win team fights, even at a numbers disadvantage. The one in the enemy base where Jun dies in a really nice pick, a really nice death brush from Gen.G. BLG know that, you know, they burned every single ultimate on that pick, though, and so they go mid lane, they know that they can siege it down, and they do a really good job of actually taking advantage of that. They end up winning the fight at a numbers disadvantage, which is pretty massive. And from that point on in the game, you just kind of know it's over. There really isn't a lot that they can do to be able to get back into the game. Another really long second Baron dance. Again, I'm not going to go into every single detail, but Elk continues to play great. On continues to play great. They were definitely the two main players with Yagao in this game number 3, in my opinion. And they're able to eventually get that second Baron. They're able to win a fight in the bot lane, and they're able to end the game and end the series, and also end Gen.G's run here at MSI in 4th place. Not exactly what a lot of people were expecting. I got a lot of comments on my bracket predictions and on my primer video that I was underrating Gen.G, but unfortunately, it doesn't look like I was. In fact, it looks like I was overrating Gen.G a bit. I still think that they're the team that we thought they were, but getting out team fought by BLG, that's not what I expected. I think it's more in favor of BLG than it is against Gen.G, but really, you know, when I said at the end of the LCK split that they were one of the weaker LCK winners in recent memories, one of the weaker LCK number 1 seeds, I kind of meant that, and I do think that did kind of show up at this tournament, but credit to BLG, their players played out of their minds. My player of the series and my player of the game is going to go to Elk in the bot lane here. He was just phenomenal. His positioning is extraordinary. The damage that he's able to put out so consistently in every single team fight without really ever being in danger is so commendable. He's just such a good player and such a positive and a huge boon towards BLG, and for him to be able to show up at an international stage and play as well as he has, it's very satisfying, I would say, as someone who has vouched for him for 3+ years at this point, and so really like that. On had a fantastic game on Blitzcrank. This is a champion he's pulled out a ton over the course of the LPL split, especially in playoffs. It was banned out pretty constantly against him in the latter half of the LPL playoffs, but obviously Gen.G not doing their homework, leaving it up here, and it was just as impactful as it was in the LPL. That champion can be an absolute menace. I've talked about him a ton on the channel up until this point. And then, like I said, Yagao was also good. Bin was sensational through the first couple of games, and then he's put on tank duty. He's still really good on the Scion, but again, not really a champion that's going to be able to take off. Jun was caught a couple of times more than I would have liked, not only in this game, but in this series as a whole, but for the most part, his engages on champions like Vi were incredibly influential. Overall, BLG just looked great. They were a unit, they were a 5-man team, and all 5 members were really, you know, firing on all cylinders. As for Gen.G on the other side, like I said, a very disappointing end. This is not what you wanted out of this tournament, and honestly, you just kind of underperformed. You took your advantage and the thing that you did really well, and you just weren't able to perform on it against a good team like BLG, and that's going to be the case sometimes. My dud of the game is going to go to Chovy, but again, Doran had a really bad series. Peanut is much worse than his scoreline would entail on the Kindred, not really impacting all that much, certainly not dealing damage towards the back half of the game, and then Paze and Delight really weren't doing all that much either. We're basically just kind of fodder for Blitzcrank hooks throughout the game, and so not really a lot of positives to give Gen.G, even in the series as a whole. They were definitely more competitive than maybe some of the Western teams we saw earlier on in the tournament, but it's not like the series was particularly close. There were a couple of good mid-games for Gen.G. Game 2 definitely comes to mind, but outside of that, really not a lot of positives, especially towards the back half of games. They're going to need to recoup and kind of get back to the form that they were in once they get back to the LCK, because that's all they've got left now. They have to prove that they are a good team in the LCK, and that, you know, they didn't just take advantage of maybe a too cocky T1 team in the LCK finals. But for now, they are eliminated from MSI in 4th place, and BLG is going to be moving on to face that T1 team, and that's certainly going to be an intriguing matchup. All right, but that is going to do it for my MSI Round 3 overview and analysis. It was a very fun series between Bilibili and Gen.G, but BLG is moving on now to face T1 in our lower bracket finals. Incredibly excited to see that one tomorrow. If you follow the channel, you'll know who I'm going to predict here. I still think T1 is going to go over, although BLG is in great form, and honestly, as a team that really functions off of momentum, this could be a much closer series than people are giving them credit for, but I really hope to see a Gen.G T1 rematch in grand finals, and that's what I'm going to predict. I'm going to predict T1 in 5, but my spread is T1 3-2, T1 3-1. I think they should be the better team in this series, but I do think BLG are going to make it close, if only just because their crazy aggression is going to make some plays happen, and obviously they've improved their team fighting a lot at this tournament up until this point. I hope that the series is fun. I hope it's interesting, but I want to hear you guys' thoughts down in the comment section below, not only on tomorrow's series, but on today's series as well. Of course, if you enjoyed the video, feel free to hit that like button. It really does mean a lot to me. It lets me know that you guys are enjoying the content here, and it helps get this video out to a lot more people, which I'm always very appreciative of. Of course, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button. We're going to be posting every single day about MSI. Of course, with MSI wrapping up, I should say, relatively soon, we're going to be covering all 4 of the major leagues as well, and so if you're interested in any of that, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell so you can be notified when those videos go live. Of course, still check out the videos that are linked up in the iCard, the playlist, the primer, the bracket prediction, all of that stuff. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day. And I will see you all later.